Yeah. And one of the things that is incredibly helpful is to, when there's been an argument, is to track back to what it was that triggered your part in it.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the On the Ball podcast, where we have curious conversation about life, career, spirituality, and anything in between. My name is Eniko Toth, a civil engineer turned world traveler, public speaker, trainer, and Toastmasters champion. My goal is to bring you inspirational topics and people that can help you find your own definition of success. When you are ready, it is time to be on the ball. This podcast will be truly inspiring for you and probably for many people you know. So please share the link of the podcast with them. Also, a quick reminder, hit the subscribe and love buttons to get notified about the upcoming episodes. Then share a rating and a review if you like what you are listening to. So, today's guest is a certified emotionally focused therapy trainer, supervisor, and therapist. Dr. Sandra Taylor is the coordinator of the British Emotionally Focused Therapy Centre, also known as BEFT, a group of professional therapists who have come together on a volunteer basis to form a community of counsellors and therapists interested in emotionally focused therapy. Sandra's interest in relationships has been constant in her life and work. She originally trained as an occupational therapist and worked in a range of mental health settings before moving into person-centered counselling. Sandra has worked as a counsellor and then educator of counsellors in university, college, and charity settings. She has been involved with EFT training in Britain, Dubai, and the United States, and is currently focusing on building up an EFT training in Britain. Her passion is in supporting people's growth and development, whether that be individuals, couples, or in groups. If you are interested in her work, you can connect with Sandra on her EFT training website, and you can learn more about the British Emotionally Focused Therapy Centre and the EFT on the links provided in the description. Today, Sandra and I will dig into the cycles we get into in our relationships on a regular basis, the negative cycles where we get triggered for little no reason, and then leads to familiar arguments. Today we will discuss how to get out of these negative cycles, slow down, and reconnect with our partner. We will talk about attachment theory and the map that can guide us in creating, healing, and sustaining love. So let us waste no more time and start the episode. Welcome back to the On the Ball podcast, where our guest is Dr. Sandra Taylor, the coordinator of the British Emotionally Focused Therapy Centre. Thank you for being here, Sandra, and it's a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me. I'm honoured.
Of course. Yeah, when I read your work, I immediately felt aligned, and I felt like our listeners can learn a lot from you and what you are doing. So I mentioned emotionally focused therapy, but many of us don't know what that is. Could you summarize it to us?
Okay, well, it's a model of psychotherapy, and it was based on couple work and expanded also into individual work and family work. It's had lots of research on it as a really effective form of therapy, especially with couples. It's attachment oriented, so very much based on attachment theory. It's humanistic and systemic, so lots of things about its philosophy and what we're looking at kind of are based on that. That includes, for example, that we very much focus on the what's going on inside each individual, but also what's going on between us and others. Yeah. We focus very much on emotion. Yeah. So emotion is both the target of change, that's the thing that we want to shift, but also it is the agent of change. It's the way that we actually change things. And that'll become clearer as we talk today. Yeah. So the therapist is what we call a process consultant. You are active in what you're doing, but you're working very collaboratively with your couple or your individual or your family.
I see. Wow. It sounds interesting. I'm very excited for our interview. So you mentioned it's about attachment theory. How does that collaborate with emotionally focused therapy? What is too much and too little attachment, and how to balance between these two ends of the scale?
Okay. Well, lots of us will have heard of attachment theory in relationship to John Bowlby. So, he did a lot of work on children. But since then, since the 80s, there's been so much work on adult attachment. So we've got Phil Shaver, we've got Michelin. So we've got loads of people who have really turned attachment theory into a science. There's so much really good research out there around it, which shows that, we don't stop needing people when we grow up. Actually, it's a wired in system of survival that we kind of turn to other people. It's not about being pathetic. It's not about being over dependent. What we can do is we can reach a place where we are effectively dependent on other people, where we can kind of lean into them and not lose ourselves, where we have a safe haven to go back to and we have a secure base to go out from. So, for example, if you think about going out and kind of doing things in the world, if we're feeling kind of really vulnerable and really unattached to anything and nobody's got our back, the way we do that will be different to if we have, a person or several people, in our world who we know believe in us, who we can turn to when times are tricky, who we just kind of know that their goodwill is and their love and their care is with us as we go out in the world. So that's effective dependency. It isn't kind of the opposite of independence. It actually makes us more independent. So that's really, really important. And if we get what we need in relationships, we can be really secure. So we can go out, we can be very flexible, we can be very creative, we can really take in other people, we can take in feedback, we can give feedback. If we don't get what we need in terms of that, we get much more anxious, or we avoid situations, we keep out of the way of them. And we see that in all of our relationships. So there are different relationships that we are secure in, that we are anxious in, that we are kind of more avoiding in. Yeah. And we will have particular ways that are common to us. This is what we often do. But we can do different things in different relationships. So what that does as a base for EFT is it gives us our roadmap. It gives us where we want to be. What we want is people to feel more secure in themselves. Yeah, but secure not in a rigid and closed off way, in a way where they feel good about themselves and good about themselves in the world and in their relationships. And what we want is relationships. So, for example, that couple relationship, we want it to develop to be, again, or for the first time, what we call an ARE relationship. So it's a relationship where you are accessible, responsive, and engaged with each other. Yeah. So when you ask, are you there for me? The other one is there. And I don't mean in some kind of perfect airy-fairy kind of way. There's limits to it. We're not there all the time and all the rest of it. But the essence is we know that person has got our back and we have got the other person's.
And what happens when we feel like we lost that connection? You said anxiousness arises, but what else could be the side effect if we don't have someone who we can positively attach ourselves to?
Well, what we know is, right, so first of all, best is we've got people. Yeah, that's the best thing that we can have. If we don't have people or alongside people, we can have other things. Yeah, so for some people, God is an attachment figure. For some people, it's their pet. For some people, it's, something else in their life that they really feel a kind of strong attachment and bond with. Yeah, so we can find some of it in other things, but another human being or human beings is the best. And I've forgotten the other part of your question. Can you tell me that again?
I was just like, what's the side effect of that if we are not finding this person?
Oh,
yeah.
Okay, so if we haven't got that one way or another, if we haven't got a sense of kind of that kind of strength and that kind of being able to kind of lean into someone or something in that way, then what a lot of research is showing is that it really affects our physical and mental health. Yeah. So, for example, if you have a heart attack, then your chances of survival are at least as dependent on whether you're in a healthy relationship as it is on the medical stuff. Mm. Yeah, we're much less likely to have mental health challenges or to be able to cope with them better if we have those relationships. Research around PTSD shows that when there are events that happen in the world and people were previous to that event were securely attached, they will get over that and are much less likely to have PTSD than people who do not have that in their lives and the event kind of happens. So in lots of ways, our physical and mental health in minor and major ways is really impacted by whether we have those kind of healthy, secure relationships or not.
But getting back to our topic and emotionally focused therapy, what is your journey with it? What did you get most interested in and what attracted you to this therapy?
So what do I suppose that's about what do I love about EFT? I mean, EFT is, it was like coming home, really. It was like it just makes sense. You know, when you can kind of sit with a couple and often, like within the first hour's session with them, you can give them an insight into the crazy dance that they're caught up in, and that it isn't that one is kind of beating the other one over the head with a hammer and the other one is shrinking away because they don't want anything to do with them, that actually they're both in their way calling for each other, and the way that they do it in their desperation, it really sets the other one off, and then they get further and further away. I mean, when people just kind of get that, when you can tune in and give them a little taste of that, even in the first session, it's just, you just see the change, you know, and then you work kind of deeper and longer with them and go through obviously all sorts of stuff. But it's like when we can really slow down and we can really see, feel what's going on for us and what's going on in our partner or our friend or our, you know, whoever. But we're obviously working mostly in couple relationships. And then how that interacts. It's like it's more than a head level intellectual kind of knowledge. It's a knowledge that goes into your being and it starts to make shifts. And, you know, you'll very rapidly kind of hear people saying we don't row as much. It's not as powerful a row. Yeah, and you start to move them to a place where they see the cycle they get caught up in and they get why they get caught up in it, and they're able to make changes and come out of that and be a team then against that cycle. And then you can do deep healing work, which is deep healing of stuff in the relationship, but deep healing work from their histories as well that they're bringing into the relationship. And there's nothing more stunning than being able to be a part of that. You know, it's deep, it's beautiful. It, you know, I mean, don't get me wrong. Sometimes there's couples that it's really hard work with. Yeah, you know, but a lot of the time you're just making such a difference in the world, you know, because they go out and they're living in families and they're living in the world. And yeah, you just really have that. And I really loved the change from working from person-centered individually to working that way. And now with EFT kind of becoming much broader, it's always been there, but it's now really going for much broader across individual work and family work as well. Started working with individuals and just loving that as well and it's different because you're working with the individual in relationship with themselves and with others. Which is really different from working with more of the individual. You're like a key part of all of EFT is attachment theory. You know, that as children, you know, we needed our caregivers literally for life. Yeah, that it is a life kind of life-saving kind of thing that we have, is this need to attach and connect. And but as adults, we have it too. Yeah, and that's what EFT is just based in attachment theory, and it just makes so much sense of love, connection, relationship. And just starting to talk about it, I just connect with that. It's just gorgeous to me.
And it's been also incredibly helpful for me in my personal life, which is what a lot of therapists have said. You cannot do this kind of therapy without it impacting your personal life in a positive way. It makes you reflect on it. And for me, in my relationship with my partner and her early onset dementia, I mean, we've been able to do being together so much better because I have had a whole framework to understand what was going on for her and how we were relating to each other. So for me, I mean, I know I sound a bit like I am a total convert, but I can honestly say I'm one of many, because it's a beautiful approach.
And what would you say the main difference between the EFT, the emotional focus therapy, and the normal therapy? So why would people choose this instead of the normal one?
Well, there isn't like a normal one, but in couples therapy, for example, a lot of couples therapies look more at skills. Yeah, so they're looking at how do you learn how to talk to each other better. So we'll give you a structure to it. And, you're going to sit down so many times a day and you're going to do it and you're going to follow this structure. And for some people, that can be really helpful. For some people, they can't do it because as soon as they start talking, they just kind of get upset with each other again. And what we do is we work at a more emotional level. So, for example, getting somebody to come and talk about an example of a recent row that they had, or a recent difference, if things are happening very quietly, what happened where they were kind of feeling uncomfortable and didn't really express it, or where was that blazing row last week. And we explore it and we go into what they were actually experiencing at the time. Because often that's it just illuminates what was going on in a whole different way. Yeah. So if it looks like, say something simple like somebody, they're getting up in the morning, the couple, and, the washing up's been done, and so one of them drops the other one's favourite mug on the floor. Yeah, it just slips out of their hands onto the floor. You can imagine that with a distressed couple, that's the start of a row, isn't it? You don't care about me. Look, that's my precious mug. You aren't taking care of it. You're not taking care of me. Yeah, and it looks like it's an argument about a broken mug. But as you kind of sit with it, it's like you stay with the piece, which is about, you don't care about my things. You don't care about me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it feels like, your partner doesn't care about you. Yes, there's so many ways that they don't care about me. Okay, so what's it like? What's it like? Yeah, when you feel like your partner doesn't care about you.
Mm-hmm.
And we go into that and we explore it and we expand it, and then we get them to share it with the other person. And then it becomes, that shouting that the other person did, that a kind of aggressive attack, if you like, was actually, I am super distressed because I feel like you don't care about me. And that feels absolutely awful because actually you matter so much to me.
Mm-hmm.
So you can see that you get to a whole different place than, let's have a practical way of you talking about that.
Yeah, sometimes we need to really understand the depth because we react from the surface, but we never ask the whys and what's going on behind. So what are the common cycles that couples get into and how do they set each other off?
Okay, so the commonest cycles, there's 3 commonest cycles, and you can flip from one to another over time or within one session, if you like. So the commonest one is what we would call the pursuer-withdrawer cycle. And Sue Johnson, the originator of EFT. She has a book, which is for the general public, and a course that goes with it, which is Hold Me Tight. So she calls it, in there, she calls the pursuer withdrawer one, the protest polka. Yeah. So what that is it's when one person kind of takes the position of calling for the other, and the other one takes the withdrawal position, which is they don't experience that call as a call, they experience it as an attack. And so they withdraw from the situation, either psychologically, they sort of just kind of close off, or, they go off to the shed, or they go out, or they go up to the bedroom, or they do whatever, literally kind of withdrawing. And you can imagine that what then happens is when the person the one does their call and the other one withdraws, the other one calls louder and the other one withdraws more. And then you can see how then it can get very vicious. It can get very, very kind of very loud and very withdrawing, because the way that each of them is actually trying to protect the relationship actually totally clashes with the others. It sets the other one off. So that's the commonest one. And then what you also have is the pursue one. Which is like find the bad guy. So what that's about is that both of them are having a go at each other. Yeah, and that's often, sometimes you'll get people where they both do that all of the time. Sometimes it's like it's the pursuer doing what they usually do, and it's the withdrawer who, at least for a time, is like, no way, and is kind of pushing back, and who may then withdraw again afterwards. Yeah, so there's that one. And then there's a withdraw. And this one is seen as the most dangerous one in terms of the ongoing relationship. So the withdraw is in Hold Me Tight called freeze and flee. And what that is both of them will not meet any kind of conflict. They will just withdraw. Yeah, and usually one of those, you can get a genuine withdraw couple, but often what's happened is one of the pursuer has burned out. They've just got nowhere, and over time they've just like given up. So what you then get is a very quiet room where they're bringing very few examples. They're not spending much time together. They're living around each other. They're avoiding any conflict. And, you as the therapist are having to kind of wake that one up. Whereas obviously the pursuer one is the opposite. You're trying to calm something down. It's really kind of very alive.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So there are all these different circles, like there's three of them that when one of them withdraws, another one tries to push on, and then the one where both of them they withdraw and they are very quiet, and then the one where they fight all the time. People would think that there is only one way of fighting. But then you just said that there are three different ways, and people set each other off in different ways. So how can we start discussing them, and how do we realize which state our partner is currently in?
So what we want to do is to start when we're calm, when things are going well. Yeah, we want to be able to reflect on what actually happens. If you were going to tell a story of how this happens, do you know it? Some people know it really well. They're quite observant, and it's like, we're doing that again. Yeah, as soon as you say we're doing that again, you've got a cycle. Yeah, you've got a familiar one, and it might be one that happens about all sorts of things. The theme can be different, but the way it plays out is very similar. So a lot of us will know already that there is one, and some of us won't really have really reflected on that. So it's worth just when you're feeling good, just thinking about, is there a bit of a pattern to it? When we have an argument, what does the one person usually do? What does the other person do? How does it heat up? How does it calm down? How do we kind of get back to each other again afterwards? So starting to just kind of muse on that, when you're feeling good, and not, And the important thing about it is being compassionately curious, because we all get up to things that in the cold light of day, we wish we hadn't said it and we wish we hadn't done it that way. So it's like, it's about in that moment, we do the best we can. And sometimes that best is not nice. And we would not want some people to kind of see us in action. But if we can hold a space where we're actually compassionately curious and we're trying to look at, so what do we get up to? That's a beautiful place to be able to get to with your relationship. And if you can do that with the other person, then you're starting to build positive cycles, because you're starting to build the capacity to reflect and to share those things and to be there with each other. So that is really good. Mm-hmm. Now, you also said what sets people off. And basically, I would say it's disconnection that sets people off. Yeah, that is the big thing. And that, when we get together with somebody, there's that, most of us have that amazing experience of love and, all those hormones are flying about and everything is glorious. And usually at that time, we're able to kind of talk and share with their partner in a way that we may never have done before, or just very much freer, because suddenly we trust, we're in love, it's all amazing. And then over time, we get experiences where we're not received, it's not okay. And we can tend to kind of shut down on doing those things or protest against it. And if we don't kind of sort those things out and get clear with each other, they can just build and grow. So over time, you can literally have an argument about anything. And one of the things about therapy is that if you go through the EFT therapy process, by the end of it, you're having conversations that I call clean and clear conversations. So if you're having a kind of distressed conversation about that favorite mug being broken, it will be a distressed conversation about the mug being broken and the loss of something precious. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but when couples come in a distressed state because, they're struggling in their relationship, that conversation about that mug is about much deeper things. It's about, do I matter?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but then, as you said, it starts with that disconnection.
Yeah.
When does it start building up? Like you said, there are step by step towards it, not being listened to, not being understood. Mm-hmm. So how does it build up and then erupts? Yeah. How can we reconnect? So step by step, how do you start making them open up again when they withdraw, both of them?
Okay, so you got two pieces there. Yeah, how do they disconnect, and then how do we get them to connect again? So the disconnection, it will happen differently for different people, so it depends on what we bring into our relationships. Yeah, we're all impacted by nature and nurture, by the experiences that we bring. So if you grew up in a really kind of secure home and you haven't had lots of negative experiences, you're kind of strong and everything else, then you're more likely to be able to, if you're in a partnership with somebody similar, to be able to just chat about things that just jar a little bit. And, it's if you kind of come in and you're already kind of anxious, or you're already kind of tend to avoid things that are kind of tricky. If you're bringing a lot of trauma into the relationship, which means that you're very sensitive to certain things. Yeah. It's like those things start to have an impact on the relationship. If the partner, if together you haven't been able to kind of address it, if you've done your usual thing, and the other one is doing their usual thing, and at some point that just kind of, it just grows. Yeah. So what you can do is tend your relationship. I mean, we get fed the image, don't we, of happy ever after. Yeah. So the prince and the princess, lived happily ever after, or whoever did that. We don't have real examples in our society of you have to work at relationships And that work in itself is wonderfully connecting. It's not a sort of nasty thing that you have to attend to your relationship. It's like when people have children, particularly, for example, they will tend to focus on the children. Life changes massively for a couple in all sorts of ways at that point. And do they tend to time together? Or do they get absorbed in kind of, work, children, and kind of lose that connection with each other and kind of drift? So there's lots of things in life which push people apart. So to reconnect again, it would be things like, it can be as simple as date nights, but date nights, to also maybe reflect a bit. How's it going? How are we doing? It might be when, you having a little bit of space each day where you're checking in with yourself and the other. Yeah, it's really important that it's not just checking out the other person, it's checking out yourself. Yeah, how am I doing today? Mm-hmm. Yeah, what are you sharing? What are you not sharing? When is a time that works for you two? And it'll be really different. Yeah, so for some people, it's like, it'll be a glass of wine in the evening and let's just have, our half an hour that's special where we're just kind of sharing our day. But you're sharing it in that chilled, connected way. You're not just informing them, you're talking. That's connecting. For others, it might be, that time when both of them are in the kitchen doing some cooking and they're kind of alongside each other. And that's their favorite time to actually just kind of do that kind of chat. So it's very much about what works for them and the way that works for them, because not everybody is, really into feelings and talking very explicitly about feelings. You have to kind of work out what your way of doing this is. What's your way of connecting with each other?
Yeah. Just look at our patterns from the past, what worked and what didn't, and just try to bring those back. Because what I can imagine also, like when two people are really disconnected and then they got to the stage when both of them are like withdrawn, just having a normal conversation will not start anything because none of them really trust the other person. They feel they are not listened, they are not understood. So it's just hard to even get started on like, okay, let's sit down with a glass of wine and cheer for a conversation. Cannot imagine that.
Well, exactly. So it's like, if you give people the task of talk like this, some people will over time start to kind of come down a level into a sort of deeper level of talking. But a lot of people will just struggle, or it will just start an argument. Or they'll just go through the motions and not be kind of all connected up to it. So if people are trying it and it's not working, it's like that's when, going to a therapist would be really helpful, because what they'll do is they'll be the person who helps guide that and helps give you the experience of doing it and gives you then the capacity to be able to leave the therapist and go and do it by yourselves. Yeah. So that's when therapy can be really helpful. And it can be so helpful if you do it when, if you're able to persuade you. The challenge always is it's harder to get two people in the room than it is one, because it takes both of them to be ready. But if you can both be, just say, yes, let's go and have an MOT on our relationship. Yeah. It's like, let's go and get it tuned. That would be fabulous. The challenge is that in lots of countries, including Britain, people will tend to go to therapy. A large majority of people will go when it's like, it's got to change or I'm out.
Yeah. But for some reason, we still don't talk about going to therapy. We think that it's something really bad, that our relationship is close to an end, and there is no way to save it. That's why we're going to therapy. So what would you tell to those people? How can they embrace the positive effects of therapy?
Yeah, I think the challenge is that there's always been a shame in a lot of people about going to therapy. And that's a shame because it's like it's such a growth enhancing experience. And when we tell people, oh, we're in therapy, people say, oh, is your relationship that bad? It's like, so the image is that people only go when it's really bad, that it needs saving. And, we need people to help change that, to embrace it as something which is, and we do get couples who do this. We get couples in their 20s who come and they say, we just know it's a little bit wonky at the moment and we want to get it back on track. And it's like, I want them to kind of stand up and cheer because they've got the right idea. They're the ones who are saying, we get that this is so important and that it needs time and attention. And sometimes it needs outside time and attention because we value it, not because it's falling apart, but because we value it. We want to keep it. We want to keep making it grow. If you think about anything you have that you value, taking care of it is what helps keep it going and makes it better and better.
Yeah, that's so true. But sometimes we just go too late when we already reached out, when it's already a great misunderstanding, great disconnection. So if we would take a step a bit earlier, it could solve a lot more problems because those wouldn't actually happen at the end and people wouldn't feel that horribly with one another. So getting back to the point, sometimes when we try to share our struggles or our days with our partners, many times we feel like a burden because it starts building up that we don't feel connected, we don't feel we are trusted, we're not listened to. So we feel like a burden when we try to share our stories. So how to get rid of that feeling without actually building up the rage, fuel out at the end.
Yeah. So one thing is knowing what it's like. If you come to therapy and you really learn how to do it in therapy, then even people who have never touched into feelings and never used that as a guide in their lives will learn how to do it. I have some amazing clients, a lot men, who have just that's never been anything they've ever learned. It's been no example they've been given. It's like a foreign language. And when we've got them on board with it and they've been doing it, they're like, this is amazing. I feel like, this is the best person I've ever been in my life. It's like they can really love it. But it's like they wouldn't learn that without that kind of support. So at home, what you've got to do is work with who your partner is. Yeah. So often you've got one person who wants to talk more than the other one, who kind of values that more than the other one. So, if your partner isn't that person, do they want to be that person? Do they want to experiment with it? Or are they not the person for that? They might be the person for lots of things in my life, but they're not the person for that. And I'll find, a good friend to do that with. But if you've got two people on board and they're like, we actually want to do that. We're struggling with it and we want to do that with each other. Then the first thing would be to actually check out with the other person if they're in a space to listen. Yeah, because a lot of the time when we feel that urgency to talk, we just launch. And we don't know if the other person is in a receptive space. We haven't checked it out, that they're actually okay to listen right now, or need half an hour and then they'll be back. Yeah. And it's like, if you want to be heard, it is a good thing to first of all check that the other person is in a space where they can hear you. So that would be the first thing. And then it would be how you do that with each other. So, we can do a lot of talking about the content. Yeah. So we just sort of bore the other person, if you like, because they're going on and on and on about all the things that, went on today. And it's not the content that is usually going to really engage the other person or really make a difference to you. What's going to make a difference is, how are you with this experience? Yeah. So therapists are used to this, and lots of people do it because, if your work is in a confidential setting where you can't go home and talk to your partner about the content, what you can do is the more meaningful thing is you talk about how you experienced that. Yeah. So it's like, today I had a really tough day. It's like, what happened? Well, it was just that lots of people came who were really struggling. Yeah. Usually it's like some people are having a good time, some people are having a hard time, but people were really struggling. I found that quite kind of heavy today. And, so yeah, just telling you that it's kind of felt a bit heavy today, and just being with you now just feels as if that kind of lets go of it a little bit.
Mm.
Yeah. So there's a real difference between just going on and on and on about the content and going with, how are you feeling about your day today? What was the feeling of it like?
Mm. Quality over quantity.
Yeah. And it's just like the kind of where you're aiming with it. It's like sharing content does, we do want some of that. We do want the story, if we can have some of it from our partner, of course. But just saying lots of content does not connect us to our feelings, does not connect us to our stress, our relaxation, our, tightness, our looseness, to what it really means to us in our being.
Mm. And sometimes we just don't do that. Like you mentioned, men are most likely are not really connected. So what is the practice that you suggest mostly for men and then for women to start observing their emotions and start communicating the way that they should?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so yes, I mean, I still say it is mostly men. I mean, we do see couples where it's the other way around, and we do see changes in that. Younger men are more kind of tuned in than older men, but we still seem to, often culturally be not supporting so much our men to be emotional. But it does happen both ways around. So if you know that you're a person who, is not a particularly emotional person, who didn't grow up in that environment, doesn't kind of feel comfortable with it, and does want to get hold of that at least a little bit, then your body is the best thing to be your teacher. Okay. So what you can do is, if you have, say, reacted to something that your partner has said, and what you can do is you can just get yourself a quiet space, and you can just revisit it in your mind as to what it was that happened. Yeah. And see what your body feels like. Yeah. So what's it like just before you do it? And what's it like as you start to do it? Yeah. So it might be, for example, it goes from just sort of reasonably relaxed. And then I'm imagining, when the partner came in and they said something or other, and then I erupted, it's like, I feel this real tightness. I feel this kind of nausea in my tummy. And at the beginning, when you're not used to listening, these are subtle, very subtle, because you're not used to going there and hearing it. Yeah. So it's often quite subtle. So, don't worry that doesn't mean it's big. It just means it's like you're just attending to it for the first time, maybe. And it's like, so when you go there, it's like, wow, this impacts me. This, is making me kind of swirl, in my stomach. This is making me tight. This matters to me. Yeah. And as you just kind of stay with that, just see if you get a little bit more perception on what it meant to you. Because what we're doing when we're reacting is we're often aiming it at the other person.
Mm.
But actually something happened to you. Yeah. And one of the things that is incredibly helpful is to, when there's been an argument, is to track back to what it was that triggered your part in it. Yeah. And you can say something like, it was when It was when my partner looked so crossly at me. And it's like, that actually is already you making some meaning. Yeah. They looked at me crossly. Right. What we want is to go back further than that. What is it that tells you that your partner is looking at you crossly? Tell me about the expression on their face, or the what is it? So then, the actual cue might be, the raised eyebrows and the tight jaw. Yeah. The strong eye contact, that sort of bitter, I don't know, that look in the face that looks very powerful, that I tell myself is rejecting and is angry. And as soon as you start to do that, you start to see the distance, don't you? It's like, okay, so when they do that, I tell myself that they're angry. They might well be angry, but they're not necessarily angry. Because often what you'll find is when you explore it with a partner, they'll say, I wasn't angry. I was da-da-da-da-da.
Yeah. So the stories we tell ourselves from the expression, because we can never read each other's mind, but like always what we see in the mirror and then how we translate it to ourselves is what is setting us off, what is hurting us, and maybe not even true, but we do that to ourselves. And as you mentioned, we need to go within and reflect. However, I have to reflect on our time now, the COVID times where couples are always together. And there is no chance to actually escape because there are curfews and there are like lockdowns and there are nowhere to escape, no friend zone. Like you cannot go to a bar or a cafe to have a drink with a friend. You're always home. You are working from home. And there's not even this tiny bit of space in between you. And like it just builds up and builds up. You don't even have that 1 hour to commute from work to going to home. And then I was talking to many friends and they were always like, we are fuming at each other. And by the end of the day, we hate each other because we are always together. So what are you suggesting in these scenarios?
Yeah. Well, hopefully by the time this goes out, we'll be a bit freer. Yeah, but it's really interesting. It's interesting as a therapist because obviously we're doing a lot more online work than we used to. And because everybody's locked down, it's like children come in and out, the dogs are there, the cat's there, the postman comes with a parcel, all sorts of things because everybody's kind of at home. Yeah. And it's really interesting because of the couples that I'm working with, I would say that it's some couples are getting on a lot better. Yeah, that actually for some couples it is really working, that they are pulling together more with the joint responsibilities because they're both home more, that they're really enjoying each other's company, that there's less stress and therefore they're able to get to bond more. So, there's less, being away from work, travel time and work itself. So some people are loving it and it's really going very well for their relationships. And for others, it is an absolute nightmare. And we know that for some people, it's really dangerous as well. Yeah. I think people need to, and I think on the whole, people are pretty good at acknowledging that, this isn't fun for us if we're not enjoying it. Yeah. That actually the blend of time with each other and time away from each other can be really enriching to a relationship. You just have a change of energy with different people around, different environments, and you have something new to bring back to the relationship to kind of share, something to talk about, rather than, did you buy 4 tins of baked beans or 6 tins of baked beans? You've got something vibrant and exciting to talk about. So when we haven't got that, it's like, again, it's about checking in with yourself as to how you're doing with that and what your preference would be. Yeah. How is it that you would like to be able to find some space? How much space would you like? Yeah. What would that space do for you? Yeah. And do for your relationship? And then being able to share it with each other. Because a lot of the time we just sort of almost like want to launch that conversation without having really attended to what would we like. Because if we know what we want, we can bring it to the table and we can actually kind of work it out. And hopefully, be able to be clear with each other that this isn't about not loving each other. This is about the kind of health and well-being of both of us and our relationship. So, there will be ways in which you can be, even in a very small place, you can be in separate spaces. And even if you lived in one room, you could be separate in terms of, because we have technology nowadays. You've got, one person with their earphones in watching a TV on a tablet or something, and the other one reading a book. It's like you don't have to be glued to each other. You can be in a whole different world, even just in that simple way.
Mm. Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. And the many things that we can take out from that, like how we can still be ourselves, even in a small place. And you also mentioned that you used EFT in your own life, and you realized the cycles that is going on with you and your partner, and how you were living, and that helped your way of solving the situations. So would you mind sharing a few examples of the cycles that you live in and how you managed to break out of them?
Okay. So, so my partner had early onset logopenic aphasia, which is a very rare form of dementia. And she went into a nursing home in June after 10 years of having it. And the last 5 years that we were at home, we did really well. I'm really proud. Our greatest achievement in life really was that we did those 5 years where it affected our everyday life well. And it's like one of the things was that, especially in the early days of that, where Hazel could still kind of empathize to some extent what was going on with me, we could laugh about stuff. We looked crazy because there'd be me, I am actually disabled. So when I'm out and about, I'm in an electric wheelchair. So, and Hazel at that time was obsessed by our dogs, which we got when she knew her diagnosis. So, we would go out to the cafe or something, and I'd be in the wheelchair. She'd be there with the dogs. She wouldn't be able to speak the order because of the type of dementia that she had. So we'd have crazy situations where I would go up to to do the order. Hazel would sit down with the dogs. I'd go over to her and sit with the dogs, and she'd go back and she'd pick up the order. And it's like, I don't know what we looked like, because my disability was so visible and hers was so invisible. It's like, I'm sure a lot of people were like, why didn't she just go and do it? So we would laugh about it, and we would understand, the sort of weirdness of it, and the sort of how do other people see us, and how are we doing with this? So we were able to include in our lives things where we could reflect, and we could talk, and we could have fun, and we could, just sort of be with the bizarreness of how life was. And then as she kind of deteriorated, she'd have much more mood swings, for example. And, she could get really angry for no reason, just like that. And I obviously that was incredibly painful. If you're being accused of things very loudly and viciously by the person that you love, it's like, excruciating. And the way that I learned to handle that was to acknowledge that. I wasn't stuffing it somewhere. I was acknowledging that. But I was also making sense of, why did she just do that now? What is going on for her that she is not able to tell me? And I was able to kind of make sense of it in terms of, she would get just very overwhelmed very rapidly. Yeah. And then her whole system would just, get overloaded. And this was the only way she had in that moment of actually kind of, coping with the overload. And my way of sort of dealing with things after arguments would be to go and try and deal with it. And I found, that would just escalate things. But it's like, because I understood EFT, I could see that what I was doing was just escalating it. And I could actually kind of step back, and I could be like, okay, so think in the other person's shoes. She's moved into this more withdrawer position. She's got to calm down. She's got to be in a place where she can actually take me in. So you get a real perception of yourself and the other and how you're interconnecting. And you've got these three positions that you can kind of just think about, as well as the feelings. So, I would leave her alone for a while, and then I would go back and I would sort of say something gently, and I would get, either she was ready and she was kind of coming back, or she was still mad at me, and I would just back off and do whatever. And I would be able to kind of go back again. And the other thing it really helped with was the most painful thing about continuing to support Hazel, and as she got worse, was this thing about, I would love to have been able to disconnect emotionally, just be a carer. There was a point at which it was like, emotionally, that would have been so much easier than this total roller coaster of emotions. But actually, she would, if I did that, she would get emotionally distressed and overloaded because her person, was not there. This is the attachment piece. Yeah. So it's like, so then, and this is how I could make sense of it, because it's like, I want to just withdraw because I don't want to hurt this way anymore. She would then get mad and distressed. And then, that if I responded to that in a disconnected way, it would just get worse and worse. But if I stayed engaged, it's like it didn't make it all really lovely, but it stopped the real kind of disconnect and distress from her. So overall, it was a choice that I made. And that was the other thing, I didn't feel as if I was being pushed into something. It was like I made choices all the way along to put myself to one side at times, and to know I was doing it, and to know that I needed to care for myself with it. And I would be with what she needed in an active kind of way. And I would be able to stay emotionally connected and be her person, even though at times it was and still is really painful. So we could not have done what we've done and what we continue to do in our relationship now without that. I mean, the first time I saw her, after 9 months of her being in the home, first time face to face, she didn't recognize me at all. There was not the slightest flicker of anything. And it was, obviously that was painful. But then I went back 10 days later and was just with her, not pushy, not in her face, not anything, and just with her. And after about 5 minutes, she just looked at me and her eyes lit up and she knew who I was. And, in all of her, she was very ill and she's very disoriented and agitated. But in the 20 minutes we then could have together, we had lots of gorgeous hugs that were mutual. She really did know who I was. I could tell her I loved her, and she could tell me she knew, and she could tell me that she loved me. And it's like, that was beautiful. I mean, that's different from last time I talked to you. Yeah, she recognized me this time. And that's attachment. That's when I know that as long as she is at all capable of knowing anything in life, our love will be one of those things, because we have a very deep attachment.
Well, Sandra, first of all, I have to say that you are a very strong woman, that many people would not be able to withstand what you are going through. And just so caring and selfless, and really putting the other person in front of you. And I can't imagine as you described a few things that what you are really going through within, but it's a lot, and you are strong, Sandra, and I look up to you for that everything that you are going through.
Thank you. And I am in an ongoing grieving process that I'm okay with. I let it be there, and I have good people that I can lean into in different ways. Some are good at some things and some are good at others. So I attach to others to help me.
Yeah, when I was looking into BEFT, there was this quote that really grabbed my attention from Dr. Sue Johnson, the organizer and head of EFT, that romantic love is not the least bit illogical or random. It is the continuation of an ordered and wise recipe for survival. We have the map that can guide us in creating, healing, and sustaining love. And I think that's also part of why you feel so connected and why you can use EFT so much in your healing and survival. Can you tell us a bit more on how love is according to Dr. Sue Johnson and everything?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at descriptions of love, I mean, people have often seen it as some kind of crazy thing that takes us over. And if it was that, then we wouldn't really be able to kind of do the work that we do, because the point is that it's not. I mean, we get that heady kind of in love kind of feeling, and it does make us all a bit crazy. But love is something that is to do with our hardwiring for survival, our need to connect with other people, and our need to be with people who we can kind of access, who are responsive to us, who will engage with us. Yeah. And when you know attachment theory and you know how to put it into action with emotionally focused therapy, you have that map of where you're going. So like I said at the beginning, to have relationships with ourselves and with others in our lives that are these ARE relationships, and to be able to kind of move from where people are currently to there, we have a very clear system of being able to do it.
Oh, thank you. And I think that was perfect end for our interview part. And I have a few questions to you as closing questions that I ask from everyone, whoever comes on my podcast. So the first question is, what is the definition of success for you?
Success for me is making a difference in the world in a way that feels good to me personally.
Yeah. So important that we feel aligned with what we are putting out there. The second question is that if this podcast would be listened to by millions and you'd have 1 minute to share your most important message, because we shared so many of them during this podcast, but if you would have 1 minute to share the most important message that you have, what would you say?
I would say, really get to know yourself. Yeah, have compassionate curiosity for you, and use that to help you build and explore your relationships with others.
Beautiful. The third one is that I'm always about learning something old every day, either from a book or from our parents, from grandparents, elderlies, indigenous people, or whatever. So what is the wisdom that you heard or read in your life and it stuck with you and you said, like, this is something I want to live by in my life?
Live by. The thing that comes to mind is something which is every behavior makes sense in context. And it's something that is important in terms of my therapy, but is also important when I kind of get a bit judgy about other people. Yeah, it's like it slows me down and it makes me kind of think, so what's going on for you? that this is what you're doing.
Yeah, every behavior makes sense one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
We just need to get out of our comfort zone and get out of our perspectives and be willing to look at it in a different way. I think that's the most important thing, that perspective. Not only my perspective, but also yours and others.
Yeah, get out of our assumptions.
Yeah. And the very last question is that you get asked questions on a daily basis, and you like asking questions from others as well. However, what is a question that people don't really ask, either from you or from each other, but you think it's really important to ask, and why?
What's the question people don't really ask? I think people ask the question, but they don't necessarily ask it in the way that would really kind of make the difference. I think a lot of times people want to ask, do I really matter to you? Yeah. But they don't necessarily ask it in a vulnerable, open, listening way. They shout it or accuse the opposite or do all sorts of things to avoid being just actually saying, do I matter? Am I important now?
Yeah, because we tell ourselves that we are not anymore, and then that's why everything is happening around us, and that's why our relationships are failing, because they don't care. But it could be something else. Yeah, I like that question. You should ask it more often.
Yes.
Well,
absolutely.
Thank you so much, Sandra, for your time today and being on this podcast. I really enjoyed your stories, and thank you for sharing your vulnerability with us and your story. So thank you for being here.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much, Eniko. Okay, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here and supporting us and listening to this interview. I feel like we shared so many insights during this conversation with Sandra. For example, on how you get into your cycles and how to get out of it, how to reconnect with your partner, and when to find the right time to do so as well. We were talking about therapy, what triggers you, how to reconnect with your emotions, and then share that with your partner afterwards. There's so much more as well that we talked about in this interview. I would love to hear what was your favorite take on this episode. Feel free to share that with me on social media. Also, if you have a guest suggestion or you have a topic you would like to hear more about, please share that with me on Instagram as well, at enikototh.me. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. I wish you a wonderful week, and I'm looking forward to seeing you on our next episode. If you found this episode motivating, make sure that you share it with others and text this to your friend right now who you think would be inspired by this story. The best way to live a happy and fulfilled life is to serve others. So share this episode with people you care about. It has no cost, but will elevate them and make their lives even better. If this is your first time here, click that love and subscribe buttons and make sure that you leave a rating and review. I would love to hear your thoughts and feedback on how this message lifted you up, brought you a change into your life. I would also love to hear your own definition of success. I'm so grateful for your support, sending love and great health to you all. And now it is time for you to be on the ball.